Too hot for TV.
Welcome, everybody, to a brand new episode of Doctor Who Too Hot for TV, but probably not the one you were expecting. So, Jack has taken leave of us for a couple of episodes, but never fear, we're going to fill your ears with some exciting Doctor Who eclectic mania. So, I've got a different co-host with me this time. So, all the way from Australia, from the Doctor Who show, it's Rob. Rob, how you doing?
Hello, Dylan. I'm very well. It's good to hear you.
It's good to hear you too. So thanks so much for stepping in. Now, as our regular listeners will know, but just in case we've pulled anybody in from the Doctor Who show who's never listened to us before, we cover anything Doctor Who related that isn't within the main TV show itself. So we do audios, we do comic strips, we do annual stories, generally always in the fiction area. But today, we're pushing things a little bit further. So, Rob, why don't you tell people what you've elected to discuss with me today?
Well, when I first came to fandom, Dylan, back in 1986, going into 87, one of the first books I ever borrowed from the library about Doctor Who wasn't actually one of the Doctor Who novels. It was a non-fiction book, a big hardback, you could almost call it a coffee table book, and it was Doctor Who: A Celebration by Peter Haining. And that book has never left my side in all these decades since. And it's something I just love talking about. And so I said to you, why don't we talk about this? And you've stretched it out into a bit of a bigger topic. But that's the genesis of this.
I have indeed. So what we're going to look at, we're going to do a deep dive on A Celebration and Rob's love for it and my experiences with said book. But when we were discussing it, we thought, how about we have a little chat about those coffee table books in general? Because there's been loads of them throughout the history of Doctor Who, and the good, the bad, and the ugly. So, but A Celebration was really the first big one. I guess before that, there was obviously a few things in the 70s and the 80s. So you had the making of Doctor Who and the Doctor Who monster book, and then there were books about like robots and monsters and things like that. Did you ever pick up any of those?
I did later in life, not as a kid. It was very hard to find things like that in the sort of mid to late 80s when you were a kid, before eBay. You know, unless you were getting taken around to lots of second-hand bookstores. And being down here in Australia, Doctor Who books, even in second-hand bookshops, weren't as common as they would have been in the UK, you know, in the home market, so to speak.
I mean, those first selection of books are very much aimed at kids. So the making of a television show is intriguing to a kid, but it's very much like, perhaps when you grow up, you would like to work in television. There is somebody who designs sets. There is somebody who does lighting, that sort of thing. But as you get into the 80s, we start getting the program guides. And again, these aren't big coffee table books. They're little sort of paperbacks. But this is, to me, all these books kind of signify the growth in fandom. In the 70s, you're dealing very much with children, 10, 11, 12, 13. By the time you get to the 80s, you're dealing with people who... we're Doctor Who fans. We want lists. We want to know what's out there. We want episode guides. And the programme guide is something you would find on a Wikipedia now. You just go, how many episodes of Doctor Who are they? What are they? But I remember first seeing a list of Doctor Who episodes and just being like, I've got this whole world to explore.
Oh, yeah. And look, there's a list at the back of A Celebration, which really turned me on at the time. But I've got a question for you already.
Go on.
And that's, you mentioned fans saying, you know, we want lists, we want things like this. Do you think fans drove these books coming out, or did these books create the kind of fans who want lists by putting them out there, and then fans read them and go, oh my God, I love seeing all the stories, all the names like in a row like this. This is great. Do you think it's a chicken and egg scenario, or?
I think it's 100% a chicken and egg scenario. I think as a kid in the 70s, every kid would be interested in the monster book, but only a handful would be interested in the making of Doctor Who. And those are the kids who 10 years later were going, I need to know more about Doctor Who. I need a program guide. And the fans slightly older than that are going, we need a program guide of Doctor Who to inform everybody. So it's kind of, I think it's chicken and egg, and I think it's a symbiotic relationship between the two.
And 20 years later, those kids were running the show.
Well, exactly that. So that's the genesis of those early reference works. But in 1983, Doctor Who turns 20, and that's when A Celebration by Peter Haining comes out. And it's very much the first, it's a big, heavy, coffee table, illustrated book. So tell me what drew you to it and why you have such fond memories of it.
Well, gosh, where do you start? What drew me to it was that it was in my local library. It wasn't a book that I could have possibly bought at the time because it was a big, heavy hardcover book. This was the start of 1987, so the book was, about 4 years old, maybe slightly less than 4 years old at the time. So it was this big, newish book in the library, and it was about this I was new to the fandom. I wasn't new to the show. I'd started watching with my brother in the late 70s, but I was new to sort of fandom and wanting to learn more about the show. And I found this book, and I opened it up and flicked through. You couldn't ask for a better book as an 80s kid getting into Doctor Who fandom. Not only because it was basically the only one out there, but the content of this book is quite extraordinary, and we'll probably go through different sections of it in a minute. It just blew me away. Even the layout, when I looked at it last night, I pulled it out last night for another flick through, even the layout is the best of the Haining books, because as we'll see, Haining goes on to sort of reheat this idea several times throughout the 80s. But even the layout, the way everything's done with it is just great. It just nails it. And even today, I'd say to someone, if you don't have a copy of A Celebration, do yourself a favour, go and buy one. Whether it's the soft cover or the hard cover like I have, go and get it, because it's just this wonderful, wonderful snapshot in time. So, there's so much in it.
It absolutely is, and I discovered it a similar way to you. It was a library copy in my local library, Harborne Library in Birmingham. Upstairs was the kids section. It was full of Target novelisations, and I devoured them. And it felt like years before I went downstairs to the adult section, but truthfully, it was probably about 2 or 3 months. And my mum said, "There's 2 Doctor Who books downstairs." And I was like, but what are they doing down there? And she showed me these 2 big tomes, and one of them was this. Yeah. This would have been about 91, 90, something like that. Mm-hmm. And the other one was the other Peter Haining book, 25 Glorious Years, which, is much similar to this, just with a bit more a bit more content. But what I love about this is, obviously, it's kind of the first big history of the show. But it's also at a time where Doctor Who is still at a peak, so there is no kind of... It talks up the show as like this fantastic, amazing idea. There hasn't been any cancellations. It's the 20th anniversary, and it's just this 20-year legacy being celebrated by this one book.
Yeah, and he's got all the Doctors in it, well, except for Hartnell, I guess, writing for it, essentially.
Yeah.
Like little sort of love letters to the show, almost. It just blew my mind,
The content is really interesting, and it's not done in a way that you would necessarily do a book now, because, as you say, you've got all these little love letters from the Doctors, and he cheekily sort of hashes together a Hartnell one out of various quotes, which I think is a bit cheeky, but nobody's done a book like this before, so we'll let him get away with it. But it is like, it's a detailed look at the show, considering it had never quite been chronicled in this way at that point.
Yeah, and this is what I mean about, you couldn't ask for a better book as a kid getting into the show, because it literally told you everything you needed to know. Where it started, who'd been in it, all of the companions, a 2 or 3 paragraph run through of each companion, all of the stories, 2 or 3 paragraphs on each story. So even as a kid who had grown up on, Tom Baker repeats, and there were other repeats happening on the ABC as well, and we were much better off than UK fans in the 80s in that respect, I could still flick to something like, I don't know, something that hadn't yet been novelised, like The Mythmakers or, The Gunfighters, say. And I could read about what that story was about in 3 paragraphs and feel like, I know that story now. And my mind just expanded like about 1,000% in the space of a week reading this book.
It's when you discover that vast history, which I think happens to all young Doctor Who fans, of like, oh, look at, there's all this here. And like things you'd never imagined of. And also, it gives you like... It's not just concerned with telling the story of Doctor Who and getting the Doctors in. Like, there's chapters by Barry Letts, by Terence Dix, by John Nathan Turner, by Verity Lambert. And it feels like often, if you pick up, say, a Star Wars book, you might have a foreword by George Lucas, and then it'd just be very much somebody telling the story of it. But this is someone who's like, I need to get the masterminds behind Doctor Who in front of the camera and behind. I need to get their words onto this page.
Doctor Who is so strange in that in that aspect that there's hardly any other shows where that's a thing. And I guess the longevity helps. It's just been around for so long and there's so many people who can talk about it. And I guess so many fans. That helps. But even when you think of other big shows, they didn't have books like this. They didn't talk about who the producers were. And you didn't have 10-year-olds who knew the writers of each story. It's very weird in that respect.
I still think that's why someone needs to look into this, but it must be one of the most documented bits of kind of modern popular culture in terms of television shows and stuff that there is. Like, the sheer amount of literature available around it is insane. But also, they often say Doctor Who fans end up working in television and film and stuff like that, and Star Trek fans became scientists. And I wonder whether Star Trek fan, again, there's never a clear-cut line there, but I wonder, because Doctor Who as a fandom was faced with producers and production designers and directors from an early age, that people go, hang on, someone made my favourite television show. I can go out and do that. Whereas a Star Trek fan goes, look at all this amazing science fiction and science. They're reaching out with bold new ideas. I want to reach out with bold new ideas. I wonder whether that feeds back to this sort of thing. I don't know what you think on that.
Yeah, look, I've certainly seen that happen in real life, that the Star Trek fans have gone in that direction. Possibly they were attracted to Star Trek in the first place because they were into those topics. And again, it's a chicken and egg sort of thing, you know.
Yeah.
You're into science, so you like Star Trek. I also wonder whether it's sort of the cottage industry nature of the BBC, especially in the 70s and 80s, to sort of, you know, show all these workings to people. You know, whereas a big US TV show of the 70s or 80s, all this stuff would have been invisible. You know, I think a Battlestar Galactica comes to mind. You know, that never sort of showed, you know, how they made the show. People marveled that it had Star Wars-like special effects. But you didn't have sort of books being produced on it at the time, or, you know, letters from the producers or anything like that.
Of course. And I guess I think it's also this thing of, maybe some of it's to do with the kind of remit of a public broadcaster like the BBC, a publicly funded broadcaster. But also this thing of, for some reason, the producers of Doctor Who, people like Barry Letts, Graham Williams, John Nathan Turner, possibly to a further extreme than he should have done, all insisted on having good relationships with the fans. And I think a lot of that was to do with the fans being so young up until a certain point that they felt it was their duty to reply back in a way that you perhaps you wouldn't respond back to a 25-year-old that might be interested in Battlestar Galactica. I don't know. I think I'm probably mixing my metaphors there a little bit, but certainly I don't know whether you got that engagement from other producers. No,
I don't think so. I think it's really unique in that respect. And in years since, you know, people have written tomes on Star Wars and have written tomes on Star Trek, but contemporary to them going out, like, you know, Star Trek in the mid to late 60s, I don't think this was happening at all.
Exactly. I think it's a unique thing. And, you know, Doctor Who first does it in 1972, so it hasn't even been going 10 years. You get it with the making of Doctor Who back then. But then, obviously, by the time we're here, 20 years on, it's a complete history of the show. And it is dated now. I think this is also where a couple of myths and legends come from, like the fact that Doctor Who supposedly started at 5:25 p.m, as it says on the first page. And we now know that not to be correct. But also now, when you research a book or you research a podcast or anything, you can go online, you can get some books out. This is somebody that's got to go off first-hand kind of information given to him from the people he's interviewing, and then what little BBC records they're allowed access to. So it's definitely clawing together the information in a more detective style, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely, because we should say here, Peter Haining was a journalist and a writer of many books. I think he's got a famous one on witchcraft that's out there as well, for example. It's not like he was a Doctor Who fan. Not like today, where someone who might write a big tome like this is probably a fan, you know, maybe even worked on the show. This was like a journalist who I think saw an in and thought, well, I'll write about Doctor Who. There's something to write about. And yeah, went and did the legwork, interviewed people, would have gone through tons of probably microfiche at the local library to get information out of old newspaper clippings and so on, because those things just didn't exist anywhere else. There was no internet to go to here.
Exactly. And it sold over 100,000 copies, which blew my mind.
It's incredible, isn't it?
But I think that's not just fans consuming, that's the general public who are casual viewers, because people do like to have those sort of books on their coffee table, and like someone who've watched it as a kid, seen a bit with their kids later on, is probably picking that book up and going, oh, that'd be a nice thing to have on the shelf.
Oh, without doubt. Maybe by the time he put out his third or fourth book on the topic, people were less enamoured. But for this first one, yes, absolutely. And there was even, and I don't have one of these, although I would love to get one, there was a limited edition of 500 in a slipcover. And the book itself is leather bound and has this certificate, which looks like, whenever I've seen one, it looks like it's got this hand-done calligraphy certificate in the front saying this is number, 50 of 500, whatever. I would love one of those, but they're pretty exy these days.
Yeah, I remember seeing them in the 90s, and they were expensive then at conventions and stuff like that, so I can only imagine that's something that's gone through the roof now.
I mentioned the aspects where they go through each story and each companion, which was very helpful to me as a kid. Something else that was pretty life-changing in a way for me as a kid too, there's a section towards the back where they talk about exhibitions that had happened around the world, and I'd read that and get very jealous because we didn't have Doctor Who exhibitions in Australia, come on. But there was also a section on fan clubs, and you could read these little pieces like the Doctor Who Fan Club of America by Ron Katz, and, Anthony Howe from here in Australia wrote about the Doctor Who Fan Club of Australia. And they would sort of describe what the fan clubs did and how they would make fanzines and have meetings and all this stuff. And there are actual addresses in there. I think it might even be Anthony Howe's home address when you look there in Stanmore at the time. And I can remember writing off and getting information on the Doctor Who Fan Club of Australia and joining it. That was kind of contemporaneous to joining my local fan group, but this was the Australia-wide. In fact, I think they called themselves the Australasia group. They tried to take in New Zealand as well, even though New Zealand had their own fan club. I don't know how New Zealanders felt about that. We poach a lot of their stuff if it's any good. If Russell Crowe makes a good movie, he's Aussie Russell Crowe. If he makes a dud movie, it's that Kiwi Russell Crowe, etc., etc. So yeah, the bit at the back about fan clubs really fascinated me and pushed me into joining fan clubs and being interested in fanzines and things like that. And eventually I made my own fanzine, and later in life I became a journalist. So you talk about these things connecting, for me it's just loads of connections.
And of course obviously there's various pictures throughout, but during that section I think there is pictures of fanzines and things like that, and you're like, oh, look at this, these self-made Doctor Who publications, again feeding into this thing of Doctor Who being the show that inspires you to kind of create or go into something. And it's like, Doctor Who fans make magazines about the show. You can make your own magazine, just like you can make your own TV show. Yeah,
that just blew me away. I can draw a comic about it. I can review an episode. I can write a story. I can write my own story. Like, really? It's like you almost had to be told when you were a kid in the 80s, yeah, this is fine. This is what you do. And bugger me, I went off and did it. Loads of fun. So creative. Amazing stuff.
It is. It's also got an episode guide, as we talked about before.
Oh, yes.
Which is fantastic. You can pore over those titles. But, it does things like list whether they're in black and white and colour and stuff like that, just because you might not know. Yeah,
bless. Look, of all the Haining books, I may have said this earlier, but if I didn't, I'm going to say it now. I think this is the peak for him. He peaked with his first one. He puts out some other good stuff, but this for me is peak Haining.
It is peak Haining. We can't misjudge how important the pictures within these things were. Now, you've obviously got, in the centre, you have these beautiful colour photos, which actually now you look at them and some of them are kind of overexposed in their printing and stuff like that. But, Seeing a colour photograph of William Hartnell when I was sort of 8, 9 years old was just one of the most shocking things in the world.
Yes, or for me, Hartnell without his wig.
Yeah.
There's a picture of him having a toast with his companions, a champagne sort of toast. There's another one where he's doing some filming for the Daleks. It's a rehearsal for the Daleks, I'm sorry, and he's in street clothes. He's kneeling on the ground, looking up at a Dalek.
Yeah.
It seems to be a sort of a posed photo, but he's in street clothes. And it's like, oh my God, I'm seeing that's the Doctor, but he's not in costume. Oh my God! You know, this was big stuff for a 12-year-old.
Oh, exactly, and you get these like lovely pictures. You've got a behind-the-scenes picture for the Abominable Snowman. Now, first of all, what's the Abominable Snowman? Amazing. Secondly, it's the Doctor just having a chat to what's supposed to be the villain of the story, you know, a Yeti, while some sort of poor scene hand sort of says something. And then you'll flip a few pages later and there's a picture of the Unit Boys, but they're all a bit older and they're on stage at a convention. And it's just like...
Yes.
It suddenly opens this world in a way that I'm surprised a licensed book kind of actually got away with using those sort of photos in a way. Like, I would assume there'd be a few BTS, but the rest of it is just like, look at these big, colourful photos or these big, exciting action photos of Doctor Who. That's what they want to present. But clearly, John Nathan Turner wasn't keeping too much of an eye on what was going on in there.
No, and you know another photo that has stuck with me all these years? There's a picture of the Master from The Deadly Assassin. Mm-hmm. And I'm not even sure I had seen The Deadly Assassin at age 12, even with all the Tom Baker repeats. At least I didn't remember it. And just to see it, even in black and white, it's so grotesque and horrible, and those sort of dead fish eyes and things. I'd sit there and just stare at that photo and think, this is, oh my God, this is crazy stuff.
Oh yeah, it's terrifying.
Yeah.
When you're a kid, that is a terrifying image. Like, I mean, we watch it now and we goes, everybody goes, the eyes are, you know, ping pong balls or whatever. We can look at it with cynical adult eyes. But whether you're a 10-year-old in the 70s, the 80s or the 90s, that was still a terrifying image to look at. And I suspect if you showed it to a 7 or 8-year-old now, they'd still find it terrifying themselves.
Oh yeah, especially in black and white. It seems to accentuate all the flesh falling off, and it's shocking stuff.
It is. So Peter Haining, obviously, he sticks around for quite a while, peddling various Doctor Who books that may or may not be a recycling of this format and others. So obviously this was 83. In 84, you get The Key to Time by Peter Haining, and you also get in 86 the Doctor Who file. Do you have many experiences of reading those? Do you own them? Is your bookshelf bowing with all the Haining you own?
I actually have a very good IKEA bookshelf that's very strong,
Good.
and I do have all these on it, and it's not bending yet, no. But Key to Time is a very good framing device, because what he does, dear listeners, is uses the calendar to sort of go through what Doctor Who things happened on what days. And so he steps away from the celebration format into something completely different. And it makes it quite fun to read, especially if you just want to pick it up and think, what happened on, I don't know, the 10th of October? And you can just flick to a date and read a little thing that might have happened on that day in Doctor Who history. And I always found that quite quaint and charming. The readability is quite high, actually.
I've never read The Key to Time, so I don't have a lot to say about it. But it has a certain... I just remember this striking cover of... It's all of the Doctors, and then the Tracer coming out of a misty lake, isn't it?
Yes.
Which is very peculiar. But
now, what was the second one you mentioned?
The Doctor Who file, which was 86.
Yeah, now look, that's a good one too. I pulled that out last night as well. I do have it. It's a lot of short pieces written in the first person from cast and crew between 63 and 85. So if you want to read some really contemporary takes from people, sometimes people who are no longer with us, so can't give us takes anymore, or in some cases people who just trot out their old tired convention stories over and over, if you want to actually get something fresh from them, it's actually really good to go back to some of these little letters essentially that they've penned in the Doctor Who file and read them. It's quite a good read too. Again, different to a celebration, maybe not as good, because again, a celebration went through all the companions, all the stories, the history of the show, all of this stuff. But this is more personal to all these people who are writing these things, whether it's Verity Lambert or Terrence Dicks or whoever it might be.
Exactly. It's easy to jump into, which is what I liked about this. And it's not only easy to jump into, but it almost feels like, obviously, people would write letters to Doctor Who actors, personnel, and sort of they'd give almost like a mini interview. Like they go, "Oh, what are your memories of working on Fury from the Deep?" And Victor Pemberton would write back and go, "Oh, we were down on the south coast and it was very cold and there was a mad helicopter pilot or something like that." And it's in a weird way, it feels like a little personal, a little more anecdotal, and that you're just getting a little snapshot of that person for a page or two, and then you move on to something else. And there isn't really a through line, so you can just jump in and out, and it's just a bit of fun, but it's an enjoyable read.
Absolutely.
So also in 86, similar format, but not by Peter Haining, we've got The Early Years by Jeremy Bentham. Now, this, I have to confess, is a particular favourite of mine. I'm a huge fan of 60s Doctor Who. I'm a fan of all Doctor Who, but there's something very mythical about the 60s, I think, because not all of it exists, and because it's filmed in black and white, and it feels so removed from the modern world in a way that, you squint, and 70s Doctor Who that's set in the 70s kind of looks like today. The Pertwee era, it's set in London. I can look and see bits of London that I know, but the infinite possibility of the 60s and the mystique, I'm pretty sure, grew from me looking at this book, which looks at essentially the design of Doctor Who, which I think is interesting, and you get deep dives on various stories it's the Raymond Cusick archive almost, and you get bits of the telesnaps from Power of the Daleks on the final few pages, and then there's obviously all the information about the episodes and stuff. Even in the 90s or the 80s when this was done, the 60s seems so far away and so alien, and I just think it's a little magical snapshot. What are your views on this particular release?
Yeah, as a kid, I found this one harder to get into. I think because, although I enjoyed hearing about the black and white eras in, say, something like a Celebration, here it was very, very in-depth, and they were, at the time, this is like 87, 88, whenever I'm looking at this, these were all stories I had not seen, and most of them I hadn't even read as target novels. The selection of stories is interesting too. It's like, we're in the Hartnell era. Okay, we've got this story, we've got that story. But then it just sort of stops. It's just like a selection of early-ish Hartnell stories. When I look back at it now as an adult, you're right, there is a lot of design stuff in it, like plans and things like that. And the insights from the people from that era are also quite interesting. In some ways, it's similar to the Doctor Who file, in terms of people talking about their time on the show and things they did, etc., etc. It's very interesting to look at. Now, the one criticism I'd have of it, and when I looked at a much, much, much later Doctor Who coffee table book, the differences were very apparent, is the sharpness and clarity of some of the images. They're very soft in places. It's not a very high quality production sort of book. I mean, it's hardcover, that's nice, but the actual images, the reproduction of them, I'd love to see some of these things a lot sharper.
Yeah. I think those images have obviously hit various fan publications, and indeed I think the Raymond Cusick ones. And I think what spurred this book is just the fact that Jeremy Bentham interviewed Raymond Cusick, and he said, well, I've got all these photos and all these plans, which seem like a treasure trove and a doorway into the past. And I just think that's kind of what spurred this. But you're right, it doesn't quite have the through line of a complete history of the 60s, and the picture quality leaves a lot to be desired. But I guess people thought they would never see these pictures, and so it's just amazing to get that little insight again, isn't it?
Look, absolutely.
So after this one, Peter Haining returns, because, someone was stepping on his turf, with The Time Traveller's Guide in 1987. Yeah,
now this one is a real hodgepodge of many articles. I mean, we go from talking about Time Lords and what's regeneration all about, through to enemies and so on. But we also end up at things like the cancellation of the show in 85. And there's actually a section towards the back of the book where Haining sort of steps in and says, okay, this is like a literal update. I think he calls it the time travel update. to a celebration. So in some ways, at least part of this book, like the back quarter maybe, is you could almost like rip it out. I don't advise this, listeners. But you could rip it out and sort of jam it into a celebration and make a celebration like an updated edition with the pages he wrote here in a similar sort of format and so on. Just taking in stuff that happened, like Colin comes and goes in this time period. Yeah. It's quite extraordinary. And so it's interesting for that. Again, the articles are a bit hodgepodge, so you can just look at it and go, it's more of the same Haining. But when I get to that back section, where he is definitely doing the update to a celebration, I'm fascinated by that section of the book. Yeah,
I feel like this will never happen, but like the definitive Peter Haining works kind of compressed into one volume about the same size as a celebration or something like that would be fantastic, just to kind of get the bookends on it, but I fear that will never happen.
Yeah, I don't know what his estate is like, because he's long dead, I believe. Does he have much of an estate who would know what to even do with this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, who knows, and whether all those original bits of research still exist, and footnotes and what was cut out, who knows? I suspect they're lost to time somewhere.
Yeah, sadly,
unfortunately. But Haining's back the next year with 25 glorious years. Now, this book, along with the celebration, I used to get out the library all the time, and this one in particular was my book. And I think this is where I need to come clean about these books. I have obviously read them and dipped into them over the years, but I would say the first few years that I had access to any of these books, I never read them. I wasn't interested. I just pored over the pictures as a kid. And so 25 Glorious Years had the most exciting pictures to me in. So this was always my favourite. But certainly, say I was looking at these books from the age of 9, I was probably 15 before I read more than a paragraph in any of them.
Well, you're being very vulnerable here and admitting to that. It's lovely. It's lovely to hear. But I know what you mean, because it is great just to flick through these and look at the pictures. I was doing that last night on the couch, literally. You know, when I pulled them all out, and this one in particular, there's some great shots in this. Actually, shots you don't see all that often.
And just shots of Sylvester McCoy, and which kind of bookends these kind of a celebration to this point. And am I right in thinking this one has a fold-out photo section in the middle?
It does.
It does. And I remember that folding out and just like these glorious colour pictures of Doctor Who. And I must have only just got into Doctor Who through McCoy, and to see Colin Baker's multicoloured coat and things like that. There was just like all these magical worlds that I'd yet to explore.
Yeah. In terms of content, this is very similar to, I guess, to a celebration. I don't think it's as well laid out as a celebration. Like I mentioned earlier, I think that book is just laid out beautifully. Some of the deep etching on images in this leaves a bit to be desired. I think there's a Carol Ann Ford on an early page, just sort of floating on a white page. It's like, why wouldn't you just put the whole picture in? Yeah, but broadly, I can see where, for me, it was a celebration, but for someone coming a few years down the line, this would have been the hot book, or the book sitting in the library for a few years. I can see why this would have been exactly the same style of book for them, because he does retread a lot of ground here, let's be honest.
Yes, he does. But it is that definitive book for the next anniversary, the 25th anniversary. Yeah. And as we'll discover going through this, Doctor Who loves a coffee table book when there's an anniversary about.
Oh, yes.
So that's kind of the last big book of the 80s. The only other one that's notable after that is from 88, which is David Banks's The Cybermen. Do you own a copy of that at all?
I do own a copy. I bought it much later in life. I wanted it from the moment it came out. I was like, I must have that. But it was, you know, when you're a kid and you've got Doctor Who magazine in front of you and it comes from this far off place, you know, called the UK, and you need to get a check or a money order in pounds sterling. How do you do that when you're a kid? I you know, so I never had these books as a kid, but later in life I got them, and in between wanting it and finally getting it, I'd heard what it was all about and heard that he'd written this, you know, balmy sort of history of the Cybermen, tried to connect all the different TV versions together, and when I read it I thought, wow, That's some imagination there, David.
It is. And it's this thing of... it's something that we get a few times over the 90s, of a factual book that is actually fiction at the same time.
Yes.
Like, he is telling a history of a fictional race, and as you say, he's sewing together the Cybermen. And David Banks, he gets a little bit obsessed with this. Like, he's very into the characters he's playing, clearly, because there was a number of cassette tapes that linked him with it, of like him reading sort of excerpts from it, I think, or whether they were new bits, and it was just like he gave all the different Cybermen different names and tried to work out an evolution, as you say. And it's like, it's a fantastic bit of factual fiction, I guess you'd say.
Yeah, it really is. Very creative. Crazy.
And it actually leads straight into the next sort of big book, which is the Gallifrey Chronicles by John Peel in 1991, which is another one of those kind of factual fictional books, as we'll call it, which was, again, much like the Cybermen, full of these fantastic illustrations of like things that you never saw on TV. So in the Cybermen, they do a future design of the Cybermen, and it's because it's a beautiful drawing, it's unlike anything they could do on a BBC budget. And the same in the Gallifrey Chronicles with John Peel. You get this picture of Rassilon looking like a warrior with his mighty bow ships in the air, and it's like, it's all those things you imagine as a kid that were happening off screen in the Invasion of Time or something like that.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. Again, one I pulled out last night and had a quick flick through. It takes snippets of dialogue from the show, and, you know, when people are writing stuff, I don't think they really got their eye on this sort of thing. But Peel sort of takes snippets of dialogue and then creates history around them. Like, there's a Time Lord talking about transmats or something in, I think it's Genesis of the Daleks, and, you know, we invented this when the universe was only, you know, half its age.
Yeah.
And so Peel goes, aha, well, the universe is this old. So, when the universe was half its age, it was this old. That means the Time Lords have been around for this long. It's that kind of reasoning. And it's like, okay, well, I guess you can say that. You know, I've got nothing better. But it does try and just, as I say, take snippets of dialogue and just expand them into something they're possibly not. But it does go through the planet, you know, the nature of the Time Lords, their temporal engineering, the Matrix, all that sort of good stuff you want to know about Gallifrey, politics even. Then it sort of gets stuck and just goes through characters who we know to be Gallifreyans, like the Doctor, Susan, Romana, the Master, the Rani, you know, everyone else, just to pad it out.
Yeah, you get the feeling that they kind of said, we can tell the history of Gallifrey, and went, oh, the history of Gallifrey, with all the references that we can cobble together, is half a book. We're going to have to put something in the back, get a few more pictures in.
Yes.
It sort of, again, links into another book that came out in 92 by Adrian Ragelsford, and we'll come to the author of this a bit later on, but it's a book called The Monsters. Did you own a copy of The Monsters?
Not at the time, but I do own a copy now. It was very expensive to get, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it was a pricey book, I think, even at the time. I really like this concept. It's just little sort of potted histories and bits of mythology of various monsters. Again, much like the Gallifrey Chronicles book, and you get things like a unit file on the Auton attacks, and you get like the Sontaran encounters are told through training exercises of an officer cadet. Again, it's another little kind of fictional factual, as I keep saying.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and you also get extracts from the casebook of Miss Olive Hawthorne for the demons. I mean, essentially, it's just telling Doctor Who stories a lot of the time, but through the eyes of the monster, I suppose you'd say.
Yeah, exactly.
Something else that happens in 92 is that Howe, Stammers and Walker released the 60s. They also released the 70s in 94 and the 80s in 97. But we kind of need to look at those as a group. Otherwise, we'll just say the same things again and again. So
I think so.
Can you remember experiencing these for the first time? Did you get them at the time, or did you purchase them much later?
My older brother got them not long after they came out. I guess there was a bit of a lag with books coming down to Australia unless you were going to specialty bookshops and things. Like, even at this time, you know, something like Doctor Who wasn't something massive and being reprinted straight away in Australia if it was reprinted here at all. But my brother got the 60s book, and I remember going through that, and what it is essentially is a more updated, more intelligent, that's probably not the right word either, but sort of step forward from the Haining books of the 80s. You know, if you're looking at an era of Doctor Who and you're wanting to look at beautifully reproduced photos and have some history and some words around what was going on, these books, well, this book originally the 60s, but then the 70s and the 80s books are just it in terms of what came out in the 90s. They are really, really, really good books, and I recommend anyone go out and try and grab them. Both softcover and hardcover is available.
They are. As you say, they're the natural successor to the Haining books. And I think what really kind of jumps these up a level is how Stammers and Walker were running the fanzine, The Frame, and they were very much part of that second generation of Doctor Who fans who were really trying to find out information about the show. And I think it was at the point where people were really starting to get access to BBC archives and things like that. And of course, what changes in the early 90s is Doctor Who's over. It's finished. So you're suddenly researching, to all intents and purposes, a complete works. While everybody was hoping the show would come back, and we all know that it does, you suddenly got a beginning and an end, and you can tell a narrative that to run through your books while you're spouting all the sort of facts that Doctor Who fans love. And I just think that's what makes these kind of the definitive story of Doctor Who at that time.
Definitely. And you mentioned, I'm glad you did mention work on that really high-end fanzine, The Frame. I think that lends itself to the books being laid out in a really nice way. They're very nice just to flick through and look at. They
are. And it doesn't big up Doctor Who's part as well as much as, that, say, like a Celebration, which is like, look at this glorious TV show. And I think there is, although it's very positive, there is sort of that dour note when you get towards the 80s of like, oh, you can see that the ratings decline and things like that. And there's an end in sight. But they are, for the 90s, kind of that definitive kind of part work, I suppose you'd say.
Definitely.
And that feeds into David Howe's book, Time Frame, in 1993, which is sort of like those three books compressed into one, and it's very much, if those three books were aimed at fans, Time Frame is like this is for the fans, but also the casual viewer who might want to pick it up. It's 1993, it's a big celebration, 30 years of the show. You want the definitive story of Doctor Who again, it's over, this is it. And it comes with those, for the first time, glorious reprints of Target artwork, of VHS covers, and just seeing those things in like glorious colour was a sight to behold in one place, I think.
Oh yeah, and sometimes blown up from their original size. Well, the size you would see them as a book, as a Target book at least. Yeah. I guess they were painted in a much bigger size, but you would never seen them this large before. And my co-host on the Doctor Who show, Dave, whenever he went to conventions in the 90s and the noughties, this was the book he would take around and get signed. And I think he has some ridiculous number of autographs in his copy of Time Frame, and some really rare autographs now, given the number of people who have passed on in that time.
I'm sure he's not alone there. It was the first kind of definitive history of Doctor Who, the finished article. So I think I saw that book doing the rounds at a lot of conventions with a lot of fans, including my own copy. Got a fair few signatures in, I think.
Oh, really? Fantastic.
Yeah, and I also, when I was about 14, 15, saw a cheap copy in some sort of outlet store for about $4.99. So I bought a second copy and I cut all the artwork out in there and stuck them to my bedroom wall.
Nice.
Yeah, it looked great, but that book's butchered. Butchering a book like that, I'm sure many fans would frown. After that, we get another celebration of Doctor Who. This comes a year later in 1994, and it's called The Doctor's 30 Years of Time Travel by Adrian Rigelsford. I think I'm saying his surname right. I don't know whether you have any other pronunciations.
I don't know. Rigelsfeld, maybe?
Rigelsfeld, Rigelsford. Well, it doesn't matter. No. Now, this has become quite an infamous book. I don't know whether you ever picked it up at all.
No, I don't have this one.
It's one you can skip for many reasons. And I remember purchasing it as a kid and being quite excited. And again, it did have a fair amount of photos in there that I was a bit like, I haven't seen these photos before. These are exciting. Fundamentally, the graphic design and layout, it's very 90s, and I don't believe it's been done with a particular amount of care.
Right.
But also, Adrian is a bit of a character. There's a few typos in there, including the most famous one of the unfortunate misspelling of the planet Dido to, I'm sure you can guess what it was. And then one of the most famous things is that the Tom Baker era finishes with Sharda, and then it moves on to Castrovalva, completely missing out JNT's first season. Reportedly because he just didn't like that season, so he preferred not to acknowledge it.
Wow.
Now, the most damning thing here is there are quite a few unpublished interviews in there, which, don't say anything particularly new until you get the unpublished interview with William Hartnell and Roger Delgado, where they both talk about the parts in a way that they never have before. But for some reason, these interviews were just never found. I think it's important to note here that Adrian, for another publication, had a final interview with director Stanley Kubrick. But
very lucky, very fortunate.
I know. He met a lot of people just before they died. In fact, there might be a court case there. But this brought him to the attention of one of Kubrick's friends and his family, asking for the tape because they were just basically like, this doesn't sound like Kubrick speaking. And it turns out the tape obviously didn't exist. Adrian later went to prison for stealing a number of photos over the course of years from various libraries and things like that. Yeah. And by all accounts, he's a very troubled individual who has trouble with the truth, shall we say.
Yes.
So, unfortunately, that is not a book that I would recommend if you want an accurate history of Doctor Who, exciting as it is to think that William Hartnell did give an in-depth interview just shortly before his death.
Yeah, the least said the better on that one, I think.
After that, we get The Companions book by David J. Howe.
Well, this is controversial, isn't it? When you open up, I mean, it needs to be spoken about. You open up the first page, and there's Nicola Bryant in a lovely outfit, and there's some pant beard.
Yes, yes, there is.
It's about the nicest way I can put it, and I don't know how that could have possibly got in there except for deliberately.
Yeah, I got a feeling that picture was one of those, and obviously Nicola has a right to present herself any which way she wants. But I've got a feeling that was a picture taken that probably she was expecting to appear in the corner, or did appear in the corner of something because of like a press shot or whatever, or an agent shot, not thinking it would be blown up to a huge size in a book some 10 years later.
Or it was going to be just a head and shoulders.
Yeah, exactly. Obviously, the book also features the infamous Katie Manning nudes, and I mean, they're all reasonably tastefully done, and it's not like it's hardcore pornography.
No.
But I think the book itself's an interesting guide to the companions. It feels like they know they've got an older Doctor Who fan base, and they know that everybody's in their 20s, 30s, 40s now, and they know how they can sell a few books is by digging out all these infamous photos that have been floating around in fanzines for years.
Yeah, we're making this sound very salacious and sort of overshadowing what the book is about, because there is some great stuff in the book. This is a good, Doctor Who author, very knowledgeable. It is a good book. But yeah, I mean, no one can talk about these books without mentioning what we've just mentioned, I don't think.
Yeah. And again, we are, as you say, we are making it sound salacious. It's very tame. It's what a 13-year-old boy would find a bit edgy. But it felt like to me that was one of the big selling points amongst the fans, and that the publishers knew this, even though, as you say, it's a very informative little book.
Yeah, good book.
You also get, that year, Ace, the inside story of the end of an era by Sophie Aldred and Mike Tucker.
I love this book. This is a great book.
Me too.
Yeah. What I love about this book is that you have, in a similar way to Andrew Cartmell's Script Doctor book, where Andrew Cartmell has written these little pieces on, about a particular day of filming or whatever. Sophie Aldred has done the same. It's her sort of reminiscences about different bits of the show as she worked on it over 3 years, with a ton of brilliant photos. And also Mike Tucker, special effects man, also later to go on to write a bunch of Doctor Who novels of his own. He writes little sort of stories about doing special effects through this era as well. So you get this like almost a diary from Sophie with a ton of photos, and Mike Tucker poking his nose in and telling you about how they, I don't know, built the robot conductor for, Greatest Show in the Galaxy or whatever. And it's just, if you grew up on that era of the show, it's like, oh, here's a treasure trove of great stuff about that era. Wonderful.
It's fantastic. And again, my era of Doctor Who, I love it very much. There were still a couple of stories I hadn't seen, so just to get, I think potentially the only one I hadn't seen from Sophie's stories was Greatest Show in the Galaxy at that point. So to see anything from that, and just to see that bus conductor being blown up and stuff like that was just very, very enjoyable, and just another bit of another bit of Doctor Who to complete the puzzle.
Yeah, great book.
After that, we get Blacklight by Andrew Scaletta, which is a collection of his work.
This is fabulous as well. I mean, we were talking about some of those earlier books and the artwork blown up in them. Here, it's obviously just all of Andrew Scaletta's art, but there's also some text where he talks about, his sort of career and such, and there's some earlier artworks of his, and you can sort of see his style change and evolve. When he was doing the Doctor Who stuff, it was very much an airbrushed kind of look. That was very much his Doctor Who style. And again, just to see some of these images for video covers especially, as well as other things. He'd do calendars and things, and is now remaking those calendars in the modern day. If you go to his website, you can buy a modern Doctor Who calendar done with all that great artwork. Just wonderful to see. Very talented Doctor Who artist of the 80s in particular.
One of my favourite things about that book, which I loved as a kid, was seeing his unused cover for the 10th Planet VHS that never came out.
Oh yeah, anything like that is just manna from heaven.
Yeah, and just being, again, as a kid who was obsessed with the 60s, seeing the idea of seeing 10th Planet ever was just mind-blowing. So to see a little, his imagery, his version of that was just fantastic.
Do you know my favourite Skilleta image?
Go on, hit me.
It's a Tom Baker image, and he is surrounded by large question marks. I think he's in a field, and there's sort of large monolithic question marks, and he's sort of standing in front of them looking slightly bewildered. I've always loved that image for some reason.
It's a brilliant image. That's from one of the calendars, isn't it?
I think it might be, yeah.
Yeah. He's a fantastic artist, and I'm glad his prints are still available and he's doing calendars and all these other things. It's amazing that his work is still out there and living as long as, those early Target books and beyond. After that, Adrian Rigelsford hasn't been to prison yet, and he's got 2 Doctor Who books called Classic Who. The first one is called The Hinchcliffe Years, and the second one is called The Harper Classics. Now, these are quite interesting books, and I think this gets a little bit more into fandom growing up. We're now looking at the Hinchcliffe book is a book on one particular era, and nobody said there are any factual or pointed out any major factual inaccuracies or dodgy stuff here. In fact, for the Hinchcliffe one, it's quite an interesting insight because Hinchcliffe revisits all his stories for the first time in 20 years, and Adrian gets kind of his feedback from them. So it's kind of his first retrospective of his work there. So it does actually throw up some interesting gems if you go through it. And the Harper Classics, I mean, you've got a whole coffee table book on 2 Doctor Who stories, which I think is quite interesting and shows the changing nature of fandom there, that, you can... We get a lot more of this later, but you can devote a big book like that just to a couple of stories.
Yeah, I mean, Harper is very interesting, being the only fella to direct in both classic and new Who. I find that quite extraordinary, given the amount of time between them and the changes in TV, and yet he nails both of them beautifully. I don't have the Hinchcliffe book here, but I would really, really like to get it. So I should make a mental note, actually, to search eBay.
I think that's one you can pick up pretty cheap now, if I remember correctly. They were both 1996. Now, obviously, what happens in 1996 is Doctor Who, the TV show, comes back. It doesn't have a huge effect on these sorts of books, but what it does do is that the BBC suddenly have this big relaunch of Doctor Who, so they change all the VHS covers, which everyone gets annoyed about. They take back the fiction licence, and they launch their own big book, which is Doctor Who, A Book of Monsters by David J. Howe. Now, I never picked this one up, but I assume it's just a Doctor Who monster book, essentially.
I would say so. It's one that I don't have either.
I suspect it's something that you would just want to dip into if you're a new viewer. It's like, oh, I've just seen the TV movie. What's the exciting thing about Doctor Who? Oh, it's the monsters, even though the TV movie seemed to lack them. But I think if you were a casual viewer going, what is Doctor Who? Seeing that book might be something that you'd want to jump on.
Yes, I think so.
So they start to slow up a little bit, actually, the big coffee table books after this. But the next big one to come along is Doctor Who from A to Z by Gary Gilliott, and this celebrates the 35th anniversary. Now, for me, this book is kind of just like, how do we do what we've done before, but tell it in a different format? Yeah,
I've seen a copy at a friend's house. I don't actually own a copy. It just seemed to be one of those things where the content is something I didn't need because I knew it, and it wasn't something nostalgic from my childhood, like, picking up a Celebration and 25 Glorious Years and going back and buying those was for me. So it's one that's kind of passed me by.
It's also, at this point, you have the advent of the internet becoming more readily available.
Yes.
So while it's not full of the streams of information that it is now, if you want to know the basics of Doctor Who, you could go online and find that out.
Definitely.
So with your big publications, you really have to start thinking, what's a new format that I can get people in to kind of entice people?
Yeah, or what's something that hasn't been done before, There's probably an example of that coming up, actually.
Yeah. Then 1999... The master himself returns, Mr. Peter Haining, with The 9 Lives of Doctor Who. Now, this is one that I don't think I even knew existed. What about you?
I have a copy.
And
it's a smaller book than his previous outings. You think of Peter Haining as doing these big coffee table books, they're all the same size, and this book is a much smaller book. Almost like, it's not a paperback, well, mine's not anyway, it's hardcover, but it's about trade paperback size, if that makes sense to anyone listening out there. So a bit bigger than a normal novel, but not huge. Yeah, it's a rehash of, who's played the Doctor and all that sort of stuff. Nothing new, really.
That's a shame, but I'm glad you've read it, because otherwise we would have just had to skip over Haining's final work.
It's not a masterwork, put it that way.
Then next up in 2000, I'm sure this is a book that we've both read and enjoyed. We get Doctor Who Regeneration by Gary Russell.
Oh yes, I was just itching for this one to come out because I had loved the McGann Doctor in the TV movie. Not so hot on the movie itself, and knowing that it obviously hadn't panned out, what had actually gone on there, what had they been thinking at the time, what else could have been made. I was gagging to read this book.
Yeah, it's this thing of, obviously rumours circulated throughout the whole of the 90s about what was going on with a Doctor Who movie, supposedly a Steven Spielberg one, although as we now know, it was just his company.
Yeah.
And on the podcast, before we look at whatever fiction we're looking at, we usually take a look at the news at the time, and there's always some sort of rumour. And it's interesting when you read this book to see what was based on something that had leaked out, and then what was, just a load of old rubbish that the newspapers were basically making up. It really goes into depth, and you see all these beautiful concept art and all these the Leakley Bible. You see script extracts and things like that, and it's just a great dive into futures that never were.
Oh yeah, some of these. Well, it's the same when you look at concept art for many films. You think, why didn't you do that?
Yeah.
There some of these recent Star Wars sequels. I have the art books for all of those, and I particularly for Rise of Skywalker. I look at some of the pictures and think, oh wow! Again, why didn't you do that? It's the same here. I see some images in this. I think that would have been more interesting than running around San Francisco in 1999. But okay.
You see those images, but then you read what the story's about, and it's very much about kind of retelling the mythos. You want Paul McGann in that environment in a new adventure, but you don't want the actual scripts. Do you know what I mean?
I'm glad you said that, because you're quite right. Yes. Yeah. The story was terrible.
Once you kind of go and do a deep dive on those scripts or those stories, you suddenly go, I'm quite happy we just got a bunch of people running around San Francisco, because at least we got a great Doctor out of it that got an audio career, whereas we could have had a whole catastrophic kind of myth-heavy reboot in the middle of the 90s.
Yeah, just being half human on his mother's side in the TV movie is the least of your worries when it comes to those other scripts.
I mean, me and Jack always joke about this, that the fact that a Doctor Who movie script was called Fathers and Brothers is just like, that completely misunderstands what Doctor Who's about.
Yes.
But it is a fantastic book, and if there's anybody listening who hasn't ever seen this book, it's well worth picking up. It's one of those things that it will still give you loads of information now that you never knew.
Yeah, absolutely.
The next big book we get is for the 40th anniversary, which is Doctor Who: The Legend by Justin Richards, which again I'd say is the sort of the natural successor to the Haining book. Would you agree?
Oh, definitely. If you were a kid coming into Doctor Who and you picked this book up, wow. It's my copy is softcover rather. I don't know if it was ever released in a hardcover. Have you ever seen it in hardcover?
I feel like I have. I feel like the first run was hardcover, but
Right.
the softcovers have just been what's been floating around for years on eBay and stuff.
Yeah, that's the only one I ever saw down here, and I have a copy. And it's a very large format. It's a different shape to the coffee table books we've been talking about previously here. It's a more of a almost rectangular shape, almost squarish, almost rectangularish, and it's very large. So you have all these beautiful images blown up. Justin Richards, is a Who guy, and he does the text quite well. It's again, I don't learn anything new when I read it, but it's beautiful to look at, and to a kid at the time, this would have been a celebration without doubt.
Absolutely. Before the series comes back, there's only really one more kind of coffee table style book that comes out, and that's the new audio adventures, The Inside Story in 2004 by Benjamin Cook, which looks at all of the Big Finish releases. Now, I think it's kind of telling that in terms of the sort of cost of these things and the interest, that it's a great book, but the print is very whereas these have been started to be big colourful pages and all the time on silky pages, we're very much back to a cheaper paper, black and white pictures and stuff like that. And so we're very much looking for it's a niche product again almost. Does that make sense to you?
Oh, absolutely. And I guess Big Finish was quite a cottage industry. It still is in some ways, but it's a lot bigger now than it was then. I think this was probably the best they could do. I mean, I think of the books Big Finish was publishing at the time, the Short Trips books, they're on very cheap paper as well, albeit they're hardcover, yeah.
Have you got a copy of this particular book?
I don't. It's never particularly interested me, to be honest.
Fair enough. I do have a copy, and it's something that whenever we're covering some of the earlier Big Finishes on the podcast, I always jump in. And they are quite, in a way that they probably couldn't do now, they're actually quite brutal to themselves about some of the earlier releases and things that went wrong. So it's quite a refreshing look at Big Finish from the people that made them, of going what works and what didn't work. So I do recommend it if you can find a copy floating around eBay.
Well, that actually interests me now that you say that, because I have been doing the great journey with Big Finish and starting the monthly range from number 1, and my goal is to get through to 275. And some of these earlier ones, although I've hit some real beautiful patches of just fantastic story after story after story, in the early runs there are some dodgy stories. I'd be interested to see them eviscerate themselves over some of them. It might give me some satisfaction after having to listen to them.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's worth picking up a copy, but I also wonder whether that information is now just on the internet and whether that book kind of becomes defunct as a result, and it's why they never did a follow-up.
Interesting, yeah.
Around the early noughties, we see these books kind of become less commonplace. Why do you think that is?
It's a really interesting question. I guess Doctor Who had really gone off the boil. The telly movie hadn't happened. Big Finish was a thing, but it wasn't back on TV yet, perhaps. What publisher really wants to sink a lot of money into a big book? And I guess that's why a lot of the books that did come out and still come out to this day are more fanish, sort of self-published efforts. People maybe setting up their own presses and doing it that way.
I think a number of things happen. Again, I've talked a bit about kind of the aging fandom here. So we kind of feel like the history of Doctor Who's been told at that point. Fortunately, someone comes along and gives us another 16 years of new history that, we get to cover in many other books for years to come. But the internet's happened, and it's very much firmly part of our society by sort of 2005. So all the basic information is there. There's a Wikipedia, there's fan sites, there's the official sites. Who's the first Doctor? Who's the second Doctor? What does Tom Baker look like? What does Tom Baker in the Invasion of Time look like? You just Google it, or whatever search engines were popular then, and it's there. So something like a Peter Haining book kind of is a bit redundant in that respect. It's not like when I was a kid, the only way I could see these pictures of all these stories was through these books, but now and read about them. Now it's kind of no longer required, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree with that.
And as you said, like there's the more kind of small independent publishers that can't afford to do those books, but also they're niche subject matters. Like we suddenly get the rise of kind of the more academic approach to Doctor Who books. So you get the About Time series and stuff like that. And like much later on, we've got the Black Archives, where people are just tearing apart Doctor Who stories and analysing them in a different way. And those things don't necessarily lend themselves to pictures, and nor do you necessarily need them. And the people that are writing factual books are taking such niche corners of Doctor Who that they know they're only going to sell 500, 400, 1,000 copies, and that doesn't warrant, the paperback itself is going to cost you 25 quid anyway, so the idea of doing a coffee table version of that would probably cost you 125 quid, so it doesn't become viable.
No, it really, really doesn't. But out of this era, I think there are some really beautiful, noteworthy books.
There absolutely are, and it's amazing that now you can pick up almost a biography of anybody who was in Doctor Who. You can read about what Robin Banks Stewart's life was like. You can read a biography of Robert Holmes, and these are just lovely little things that wouldn't have been possible 20, 30 years ago, I don't think.
No, I mean to rewind just a little, there's one coffee table book we probably skipped over, and that's John Pertwee's final memoir.
Of course.
Which
Do you know what? We missed over that and Nick Courtney's as well.
Oh, there you go. But I find that quite an interesting read. It's heavy on the pictures. It's large format. There's not a lot of text, but it's good to read. If you've only read up to Moon Boots and Dinner Suits, that doesn't really cover Doctor Who, and here he covers Doctor Who, and that's a good thing. But also stuff in this era, in this more modern era that we're talking about, like the Target book, which reproduces, again, a lot of Target book covers and things like that. It's a niche topic in many ways, but it's so beautiful to look at.
And you do, like, the big coffee table books do continue to a certain... We get a book called The Legend Continues in 2005, and then we get The Vault, Treasures from the First 50 Years in 2013, and I can only imagine there's another book in the works for in a couple of years' time, where they are still like, how do we tell the history of Doctor Who in a different way that is a coffee table book for fans that'll interest them, but again... Maybe the casual viewer wants the complete history of Doctor Who on their shelves, and that one, The Vault in particular, I'm a big fan of. Like it's just got loads of interesting pictures in a way that you've never seen them before.
Yeah, and I will throw in a vote for something called Impossible Worlds, which is our old mate Mike Tucker. He's back with a guy called Stephen Nicholas, and again, that's a lot of great art and photos. It's like a better done Haining sort of book in some ways. Beautiful reproduction. Yeah, Impossible Worlds, good book.
I'll pick that up. And something that I've not experienced, but I've heard great reviews, which kind of, they're not quite coffee table books, they're sort of like magazines, I guess you would say, but certainly taking the baton from House, Dammers and Walker, from Peter Haining, is The Complete History, which ran from 2015 to 2019, which I think really went into deep detail on the making of every era of Doctor Who over the course of X amount of issues, but they all look beautiful on shelves, like when I've seen collections of them on the internet, and that must, for the moment, be the definitive story of Doctor Who, I think.
Oh, I think so. I shied away from them because it was one of those, collect every week or every 2 weeks or something sort of things.
Yeah.
And I just thought, I can't sink that much money into this, when I essentially know a lot of the information. But it is a beautiful, beautiful set if you have one. you have my respect.
Exactly. I can imagine somebody who doesn't have the vast amount of Doctor Who books I've got either on a shelf or in a box somewhere. That must be a good starting point to kind of get that history if you really want to. If you're perhaps someone that's got really into New Who, enjoyed all the classic Who, and is like right now really want to get to grips with what this show is, I can imagine going through that every 2 weeks would be a fascinating journey.
Oh, and if you're a particularly OCD Doctor Who fan, having all the spines line up and all the books be the same size and all of that, that must be very satisfying as well.
I know. But of course, as with Doctor Who fans, it's already out of date because they chose not to continue it after the Capaldi era.
Yeah, God.
which is a shame. I don't know what that decision was based on, but the spines would have almost certainly had to change in terms of the current branding.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. Maybe it was Chibnall's reluctance to talk about what he's doing. Maybe they just couldn't get enough information for them, basically.
I mean, that's very true. Maybe they'll start the range up again once he's gone in a few years' time.
Yeah.
So, Rob, I think we've done pretty well covering the history of those coffee table books.
We've talked about a lot of books here.
We have. We've darted through them in just over an hour. So do you have any final thoughts on kind of the legacy of these factual books or where you would like to see them go in the future? Is there anything you think that's missing perhaps from this large selection of books? Just give us your final thoughts.
I think at this point in time, what fascinated me in some of these earlier books was when you would get letters or interviews with people on camera or behind the scenes. And I think the natural evolution of that is into their autobiographies or biographies or things like that. And we've been seeing those come out over the years. I read Davo's, several years ago now, for example. And as more and more of these actors get to a certain age, there will be autobiographies and things. And I think that's really the interesting stuff to read, where they just come out and speak their truth, as our American cousins would say. And you might get some new sort of information there and some different sort of information. I think that's probably of most interest to me. I guess as long as there are new fans, there's always a need every 10 years or so to put out a book like a celebration. Perhaps, as you say, the internet has taken over to some degree, but there is room. There is room for books, I think, in a kid's life, at least one. But yeah, I think it's autobiographies for me is the big one. Yeah,
do you know there's actually a biography that I would like to see done?
No, which one?
You might think this is a bit of a weird choice, but I would like to see somebody do a biography of Pertwee. I know he's done his own, but I feel like Pertwee, the way he presented himself and his stories, he never got to a point where we really got to see the real John Pertwee. And I think there's lots of people around who have told stories of the real John Pertwee. And I'd just like a slightly kind of more insightful, objective look at his life.
Yeah, if you could find some contemporaries who could tell stories and then just sort of space them out across the years, that could become an interesting read. Each chapter by a different person, perhaps.
Yeah, potentially. And there's one other book that I know is never going to happen, but how Stammers and Walker, if you can hit me up with a 90s volume of your Doctor Who books. I know there wasn't much on TV, but there was loads to document. Even as a kid, I remember getting to 1999 and thinking, I hope they do that, and they never did. So that 16-year-old Dylan is still waiting for that book.
Wonderful.
Well, Rob, thank you so much for coming to talk to me today about Doctor Who factual books and coffee table books. It's been enormous fun having you on.
Oh, this was a real pleasure. This was no hardship at all to talk about these books. They're just really nice things to think about and indeed to read. Fantastic. Well, I tell you what, why don't you let the listeners out there, just in case there's anybody that doesn't listen to the Doctor Who show, just let them know where they can find you and your podcast. Oh, the easiest place would be our website, which is www.thedwshow.net. Fantastic. Well, until next time, I don't know whether Jack will be back next time, but he'll be back within the next couple of months. But certainly I'm going to keep churning out episodes with some new and exciting guests on. So, Rob, thank you very much for coming on. Great pleasure. It's been fantastic to have you. And this has been Doctor Who Too Hot for TV. Bye now.
Too hot for TV.